Hey, everybody. Today on Unbeatable, you get a chance to hear from Brandon Young. This guy's got an incredible story. And I don't just mean a story of a soldier in war in Afghanistan. He's got that. I don't just mean the story of a leader who's figured out how to help people at the highest levels. He's got that. I'm talking about a kid who grew up under some really, really rough circumstances, and it stuck with him for most of his life until a point where all of those things came to a head and he was in over his head. And that's the moment that changed his life forever. You're going to love this story from Brandon Young today on Unbeatable.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
Hey, Brandon, thank you so much for being with me on this episode of Unbeatable.
Hey, and thanks so much for having me on, Jeff. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. We're going to go back, way back in your story and start. I want listeners to learn about who you are. And I think a good way for them to understand the kind of guy that I'm interviewing today is to go back to your childhood. You got a pretty amazing parent. You got a pretty amazing mother, it sounds like. Um, because she taught you about hard work. She taught you about grit and just what it takes to handle a really rough life, right? Working 4 jobs and
Yeah.
trying to keep food on the table. Tell us a little bit about what life was like growing up in that single family house or single parent house.
Yeah, my mom, she really taught me a lot about what it truly means to be unbeatable in life, I
All
think,
right.
or at least laid some of the seeds of being unbeatable. So I grew up in the Bay Area, California, and
Uh-huh. Which, by the way, is an insanely expensive place to live, right?
it is, it was insanely expensive back then during the real boom of the 80s, 90s, and we were really in that world when my father was around, and he was a really sick guy,
Uh-huh.
just a real uh, just a real sick guy, very abusive, really pitted people against each other, and it was a really chaotic home. And then finally, by the time I was 11, he decided to clear out every asset that he and my mother had ever accumulated together and take off. And so my mother was left
Oh, he took
with
the money and ran, is what he did?
he took the money and
Oh,
ran and left my mother with a foreclosed house in
holy
the
smokes.
hills of the East Bay, during the 80s here. And
Wow.
so my mother, who, high school educated, hard worker, grew up in a real kind of salt of the earth Jewish home,
Uh-huh.
raised us. I grew up in a non-practicing Jewish home. We didn't go because to synagogue because my father was just such a weird dude, I think. Um, and didn't like the idea of giving any money over. I think that's really what it was
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
His god was money, anyways, and women, frankly. So that's the altar that he worshipped on all the time.
Uh-huh.
But that's kind of how things went down. So at 11 years old, I really became so close to my mother in terms of being almost like an emotional partner because she was so wrecked and broken
Yeah,
with
sure.
this. And but she worked her butt off. She worked 4 jobs, never stopped, and I was
Wow.
a free and reduced lunch kid, and
Yeah, yeah.
just trying to kind of stay in. We had a lot of help from the community around us, but it just always felt like everything was an uphill slog every day, just growing up in that environment. And so by the time that I graduated high school, I just kind of wanted to, get out and get to it. I should also mention that, I wanted to be a ranger since I, had memories. Like
Really?
I always wanted to be a soldier.
How did you learn about the Rangers? How did you decide when you were young that that's what you wanted to do? What was it that got your attention?
Yeah, I mean, so Commando, First Blood,
Oh, yeah.
GI
All right.
Joe,
Uh-huh.
and I just think some people have that, their heart is set to that azimuth, and I just always kind of grew up scrappy fighting. I was
Yeah.
always fighting. Like I said, when my dad was around, it was just a really violent and chaotic home. And so, I had bloody knuckles like since I was a little guy.
Yep.
And it just seemed like the way to go. So graduated high school and, went to Fort Benning on a unassigned airborne infantry contract. And as I was in basic training, I was a platoon guide the entire time,
Okay.
except
Which
for 2 days.
means somebody found something in you that looked like a leadership, right?
Yeah, I guess. And so that was a treat, sort of.
Uh-huh. Treat, air
So
quotes. Yeah.
that was an air quote treat.
Uh-huh.
Um, and you know, about towards the end of the cycle, we got a new drill sergeant who had been in 3rd Ranger Battalion, and
Awesome.
yep, and he says, you know what, Young, you should check out, being a ranger. I said, oh, I do want to be a ranger drill sergeant, but I have to wait until I'm like a sergeant. He's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Who's giving you
So
that bad information?
yeah, exactly. So long story short, he tells me when you get to airborne school, go ahead and volunteer for RIP. And I went there every day before formation. I
Uh-huh.
knocked on the door. The gentleman's name was
Uh-huh.
Sergeant Bessa. I never even saw the guy, but
Yeah.
twice.
Right.
And I would go and I'd knock on the door, and he wasn't there. And then I'd go after, and he wasn't there. He
Uh-huh.
wasn't there because he was probably out, recruiting people, doing
Yeah.
his job, right? So Jeff, I would write my standard name line on notes or on his
Uh-huh.
chalkboard, and I'd put it underneath his door. And then, as you know, 2 weeks into airborne school, they have a ranger recruiting
Yep.
brief, and they show the HUA
Right.
video, and I write my name down on the piece of paper because there he is, and I hand it to
Yep.
him, and he looks at the paper and he says, "Are you the guy that keeps putting his name on my chalkboard?" I'm like, "Roger, Sergeant." He had me on the front lean and rest the entire
Oh,
briefing.
nice. Yeah. Hey, you and I
Yeah.
took the same path. So I went to Fort Benning unassigned infantry. I'm at airborne school. I really want to go to the Ranger Regiment. And I remember that Ranger briefing while I'm in airborne school. And here's what I remember: there's a clipboard, and they are asking everybody that's in the room, hey, if you're really interested, put your information on the clipboard. Like 200 guys put their name on the clipboard. And then when graduation is over with, they come with the same clipboard and they're like, okay, I'm going to start calling names out, and you guys meet me over here in this formation. He calls 200 names, and I'm not exaggerating. Only 5 of us go to that formation. The other
Wow.
195 are like, you know what? I was reconsidering, and I think I'm good. And I'm looking around like 195 of you just decided. I think their buddies told them, "Are you insane? Why would you do that to yourself?" So
Exactly.
I just remember that clipboard. I was thinking, I'm never going to get in. There's too many names on this clipboard. And
It's
until
so
they started
funny.
calling people out of the formation.
Yeah, Jeff, it's so funny you say that because I remember Sergeant Bessa walking out on Friar Drop Zone with that clipboard
Uh huh.
and reading out 3 names, and I was shocked that I was one of them. I
Yeah.
was like, yes.
I made the list.
Yep.
Yeah. So obviously, you go through the assessment and selection process, which by now most of my leaders are aware. This is a brutal process with a really high attrition rate. And it's not designed to teach you so much as it is to just test you. Do you have what it takes to serve in the Ranger Regiment? And Brandon, you obviously have what it takes because you serve in the same unit for a long time. Tell me about your first few years in the Army, your first, 10 years in the regiment.
Yeah. So I ended up getting assigned to the 2nd Ranger Battalion, and I always tell people that if you want to make it, you got to really know why you
Yeah.
have to make it.
Yeah.
And for me, being a kid who was left behind by his father, I always had that hole that was in my heart, wondering what is wrong with me. And I needed to be somebody. I needed to prove that I wasn't a throwaway kid. And so I took all the beatings, and the beatings came
Uh huh.
fast and frequent.
Yeah.
And so I ended up getting assigned to the 2nd Ranger Battalion up in Washington State.
Uh huh.
And I got up there, and I was assigned to the Black Sheep 2nd Platoon Alpha Company
Yep. All
275.
right.
And
Uh
yeah,
huh.
and I was the only guy that, made that walk across the quad. So,
Yep.
and you talk about like the shock factor. The experience at Cole Range in assessment and selection, what was then called RIP,
Yeah, right.
Ranger Indoctrination Program. uh, it is very brutal.
It
It
is.
is it
Yep.
is very tough, and you hear this when you don that beret and you put the scroll on. You hear this, that this was the easy part.
Uh-huh.
Getting to your unit and staying in your unit, that's the hard part. And most Rangers stay for about 3 years, and
Yep.
they serve with honor, and it's because it's a grind.
Yeah, it
I ended
is.
up staying for just shy of a decade, which was a real honor to be a part of that. But I remember showing up, and it's just shock factor. Everything hits you so fast.
Right.
My squad leader didn't talk to me for a month, right? And it was like I ran like an 11:30 on
Yeah.
our first PT
Uh-huh.
test 2 mile, and he said, like, you just might make it here, young. And
Yeah.
and so but you fight and you grind, and I was able to go to Ranger School after about 9 months, so it was fairly fast during
Yeah,
that
that's
time.
pretty fast.
Got my Ranger tab, went straight through. In the winter, that was another sufferfest, winter class. So
I did that. I know what it
yeah,
feels like. Yep.
proud proud members of the White
That's
Thread
right.
crew, I
Yep.
see.
Mm-hmm.
And just trained and trained and trained. And so by the time the towers fell on 9/11, now we're 2001. I'm a squad leader at this point in time in the 2nd Ranger Battalion. I've been
Yep.
doing the do for a while, and we've been training for so long, and we were really ready. We were really hungry. In the midst of all of that, I met a amazing young lady one night out in Olympia, Washington, named Kelly.
Uh-huh.
And Kelly and I had been dating for about a year and a half, and we were supposed to be married in December of 2001.
Yeah.
Well, her mother had a really aggressive form of cancer come the summer fall of 2001. And when the towers fell, actually, she had just had her first round of chemotherapy, and she was in the
Wow.
hospital. 9/11 was her birthday. It was her 53rd birthday, and we did not know that it would end up being her last birthday.
Wow. Yeah.
So she went home the day after from the hospital, and she was on hospice care, and she had a day of clarity on the 17th of September. Kelly and I called a justice of the peace over, got married in the living room of the house she grew up in. 2 days later, her mother died, and about 5 days later, I was in the Middle East in Jordan.
Wow.
So,
So it was that quick after you guys met and got are married that her mother passed?
yeah, yeah, two
Yeah.
days after.
Wow. And then, of course, you don't have much time to learn how to be husband or wife if you're 5 days later on an airplane flying overseas and getting ready to take part in operations in Iraq or I mean in Afghanistan.
Yeah. And it was all so fast and furious. We were in Jordan. This was, during the times when we were doing
Hmm.
the early Victor Bright Star.
Yeah.
Uh, the complexion of that changed immediately
Uh-huh.
once the war started. We had part of 2nd Ranger Battalion was in Germany. We had then part of 2nd Ranger Battalion was in Jordan. Meanwhile, all the other battalions
Yeah.
are starting to move and jockey,
Right.
and nobody knows what's going on. So, yeah, it was an interesting time, and we were over there in Jordan, and we were 30 days into the deployment, and I was able to call home for the first time because everything was so locked down.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Comms and everything was so locked down. So I called home, and Kelly said, "I'm pregnant," and I said, "Of course you are."
Because on
That
our
sounds right.
timeline, yeah, that just sounds like it would that's how it's going to work for us. Yep.
Why not? so so Kelly was pregnant, and carried the pregnancy completely alone. I was gone. Come 9 months later, I was listening to my son being born from Bagram,
Yeah,
Afghanistan.
Afghanistan.
So
Wow, man. I got to talk to you in just a second about what it was like to not be at home on one of the most important days of your life. A son is being born, and you're hearing it over a phone instead of in the room. But before we do that, man, I want to go back because I need the listeners to, I need to stress a couple things to the listeners that you just said. One, serving in the military itself is a challenge. Serving in the Ranger Regiment is a challenge. And the pace is so tough. The assignment is so physically demanding that people just get busted up. They just physically can't handle it. And as you said, the average guy does 2, maybe 3 years, and they're gone. The fact that you were there for 10 years straight, man, that's very few people ever make it 10 years nonstop in that unit, which really sets you apart, by the way. But you made a statement a couple of minutes ago that I really need the listeners to hear. What helped you settle on the Army, and if I can use these words, find your way to the Ranger Regiment, is not what you wanted to do, but why you wanted to do it. And I think I need you to explain that a little bit more to listeners, because most people are really, really following their what right now. I'm putting quotes around the word what, but they don't
Mhm.
understand just how powerful the why is. And I've been convinced the why is far more powerful than the what. If you figure the why out, the what will take care of itself. If you figure the what out, maybe the why figures itself out, maybe it doesn't, but the why, you're doing what you're doing, is far more important. And it sounds like for you, the why was, I had a really bad example as a father, and I need to figure some things out. Can you just, as a leader and a coach of leaders, can you talk a little bit more about why your why is so important?
Absolutely. I appreciate that. The understanding your sense of purpose, the why behind what you are willing to do, helps the what fade into the background when it is particularly bad.
Yeah, when it's hard, right?
Um, Absolutely. There is, if you don't know why you're doing it, then there is no reason to endure in that space. And endurance has its limits. My business partner Blaine Smith, who was a Green Beret West Point
Uh huh.
graduate, exceptional story as well. He and I talk a lot about the fact that perseverance is greater than endurance, and explaining it this way.
I'm writing that
So
down right now.
so we explain it this way. With endurance is built for when things are really hard, right? You have to endure. Think about all the endurance sports we have out there. And the way I would best describe it is that when you start at point A, by the time you get to point B with endurance, you're basically a more tired version of yourself than you were
Yep.
at point A. Perseverance is not the same. By the time you get to point B, you are a different person. You have grown, you have transformed to become the person that the situation calls for you to be. And I experienced that at different phases of my life in different settings, because my why, my purpose, that was greater to transcend over the pain of being an abused kid, over the pain of being an abandoned kid, over the pain of being an outsider on the inside, living in a rich community and having a mother who was working 4 jobs and scraping away, and being the kid that was getting free and reduced
Yeah.
lunch and free yearbooks and all that kind of stuff. Like, you learn to be an outsider, but why, the why, kind
Right.
of pushing through it, was really the transcendent, North Star, the vision of what a brighter future could possibly look like. And you know, I wanted to be somebody, really, is
Yeah.
really what it came
Yeah.
down to. Like, I didn't want to feel the way that I felt as a young man, who felt so damaged and unlovable. And so there was a shadow side and a light side to it, to be frank,
Yeah.
Jeff. The light side to it is that one thing, I always was born with a sense of strong justice,
Uh
and I,
huh.
I hated bullies, and I hated being bullied, because as being the youngest in a
Sure.
family that is chaotic, what rolls downhill,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
and I caught a lot of it, right?
Yep.
And so I was the kid out on the playground who would find the bullies and beat them up, so the light side of it is that I wanted to be one of the good guys.
Yeah.
I wanted to be one of the good guys out there, and I wanted to protect people. The shadow side of it is that I unfortunately, learned as a young man. What I learned was that I did not deserve love.
Yeah.
What I learned is that everybody around me in their perfect homes and in their perfect lives
Hmm.
deserved love. And so I bought a lie as a young man that said, well, I don't deserve that, but I can defend that for these people.
Yeah.
And so for me, going through the pain at Cole Range, going through the countless painful road
Oh yeah.
marches,
Uh-huh.
the damage, I mean, the nights where you were on a 30-mile road march with a machine gun and
Yeah.
you had blood pouring out of the drain holes of your
Uh-huh.
jungle boots,
Yep.
I just couldn't stop for the first part on the shadow side of things, because I had been running so hard my whole life, because I was running from the image of the lies that I
Yeah.
bought as a kid.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't stop because of who I had aspired to be, because as a ranger I learned things like whoa, wait a minute, like there's a place for me here.
Right.
Not only am I rewarded for my ability, my propensity for violence, and my you know my adeptness at
Right.
applying violence of action in the right form, but I also found a family for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that became something, the why. I didn't want to let Vinny down, or I didn't want
Yeah.
to let Gillespie down.
Right.
I didn't want to let these guys down. And it just kept driving me.
Yeah. The guys that did really, really well in these very demanding, very dangerous jobs, especially special operations roles in the military, a lot of them came from broken homes or inner cities. A bunch of them honestly came from the gangs, and they found the family that they'd been looking for their whole life in the unit that they're now serving in. And as you just described it, their family became the buddies in their unit. And the powerful why for them was, I don't want to let my buddy down. So I'll endure anything, including my own death, not to let my buddy down, which does some pretty amazing things on the battlefield. But that's not the healthiest way to look at life, right?
No.
I hope people are hearing from you right now. And by the way, as you were telling your story, I was thinking a dad who abused you and bailed on you, a mom who's working 4 jobs, which means she's not going to be at home a lot to hang around you and nurture you. You're pretty much figuring out how to live life, on how to raise yourself, right? Which makes you very independent and very tough by the time you show up to the Ranger Regiment. I hope people are just hearing from you, man. If you're not careful, you will pursue your what and not understand the why. And if your why is just, I want people to respect me or like me, man, that's going to let you down. That's going to let you
Hmm.
down really hard at some, that may take you a long way, but at some point it's going to become completely shallow. So, man, I'm learning some things. In fact, I'm writing some quotes down from you while we're talking today, Brandon.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right. So now you're in the Ranger Regiment for a while. Now I want to go back to where we left the story. Now you're deployed and Kelly's having a baby and you're not home. And that many of my friends have said is one of the toughest moments of their life, when every fiber of their being wants to be in that room with their wife. But I'm halfway across the world on a battlefield in Bagram, Afghanistan, listening to my wife give birth over the phone. Can you describe what that was like, man?
Yeah, so it was really tough. The last thing that I ever wanted to be as a father was absent, and that was the first thing that
Yeah.
I was.
Yeah. Because
So
that's what
that
you
number
grew up with,
one
right?
hit me right in the heart. I remember hearing Kelly giving birth to Jaden, and the cries and the pain on the other side of
Hmm.
the line, and just feeling like such a failure, an absolute failure
Yeah.
as a father, as a husband, as a man.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of those times in my life where you have those moments of clarity, and you say, like, what am I doing?
Yeah. Why am I doing this
Because
to my family? Right.
why am I doing this to my family? And the truth is that I chose that. That's the truth.
Yeah.
The lie that I spun and that I maintained for 15 years to Kelly is that I didn't have an option. I had to go. It's just, it's my duty and
Hmm.
this and that, you know, but remember, this is now the winter of 2002 was when
Yeah.
things started to spin
Yeah.
for Second Ranger Battalion. And all we had ever known at this point in time was, the operations that like you had participated in,
Right.
the Just Causes, the Gothic Serpents, where
Mm-hmm.
short time horizon, high op tempo, hit it and get home. The truth, Jeff, is that I was going to be damned if I wasn't going to go
Yeah.
with my boys,
To
with
combat.
our team to combat.
Right.
That's just the truth. And so there was so many layers of shame bound up in this, because I'm a guy now, mind you, I'm 23 years old, and I have, a one family in one side, and that is my family, Kelly, and this baby that we have
Right.
brought into creation together. And then on the other side, I've got my Ranger family, which is the family that felt like, the first family I had
Right.
felt like
Yeah.
I was a part of. And so I'm dealing with this, and I chose, in the end of the day, it might not really have been much of a choice, because
Right.
who knows, but it didn't matter, because in my heart, I'll never forget, Chad Jones, my platoon sergeant, and I getting face to face, and he's like, "Hey, we really need you." I'm like, "I'm going."
Yeah.
That conversation took 5 seconds.
Yeah. Yep. And I think almost everybody that you and I worked with would have done the same thing. A couple of years into the war, that unit started to realize just how important those moments were, and started to say, hey, if you want to stay home with your family when they have that baby, we'll go without you and you can catch up later. And not every unit gave their people that option, but that unit did. But early in the war, for most people, that wasn't even an option. It was you're going because everybody's going. We need everybody, and especially leaders like you. Losing you would have been really hard for the unit to handle. So you and Kelly go through a number of deployments together. By the way, we served for a little bit of time together at Second Ranger Battalion and did a few deployments, like more than a few deployments. There was a 3-year period where I spent more time in Afghanistan, far more time in Afghanistan and Iraq than I did in the United States. I told people I might as well just change my mailing address to here, because I've spent more time here than I am back in Fort Lewis, Washington.
Yeah.
But at some point, it sounds like you and Kelly decided, man, we just can't keep this up. So you decided to transition. How did that decision happen?
Yeah, so just to go in a little deep into those times, I ended up doing a couple of rotations with the Second Ranger Battalion, and it took us to the place where we were out there in 2002. We came home, deployed again the day after Christmas 2002. And so come 03, we were over there when the war started in Iraq. And so we got stuck. And so now we're stuck in Afghanistan, essentially taking on 375's rotation.
Right. Yep.
We're the lost company of Rangers, SECO 275 out there, plus Earth Pigs from ACO, ACO 275. And we're out there. And so meanwhile, back at home, I've missed Jaden's birth. I've missed, essentially the first chunk of our marriage.
Right.
And they keep getting the runaround. Your husbands are coming home. They're not coming home. They're coming home in 2 weeks. They're not coming home. This kept going on. And so Kelly is just getting the rope-a-dope, and all these wives are getting these horrible circumstances. So when I got back from that one finally, in the summer of 03, I actually said to the command, I had been at 275 then for 6 years straight. I was a weapons squad leader, one of the senior squad leaders in the battalion. And, I was like, hey, I gotta figure some stuff out, guys. Like, I gotta press pause. Can I go down to regimental headquarters in Fort Benning and be a part of the assessment and selection team? Is there something we can do? So I got granted that. So we had orders. We're packing up the house. I go to work one morning in October with the house, half packed up in boxes, and I didn't come home until December. And we got blown out again for winter strike. So the battalion was notified. You probably remember that one.
Yep.
As I like to call that, the entire Ranger Regiment over in, Nangalam, Afghanistan, which I would affectionately call Ranger Rendezvous without beer and sports. And so, and that was just devastating. for Kelly and me.
Yeah.
You know, it was a process of keep getting a line of a thread of hope and then getting it
Then I get
yanked
a yank
out
back.
from,
Yep.
yeah, which basically, Jeff, was my childhood.
Yeah.
You know, one shred of hope and yanked back out from underneath you. We were over there. We took our first casualty for 2nd Ranger Battalion of the
Jay
war.
Blessing.
Jay Blessing, a dear friend who I had
Uh-huh.
grown up with in ACO. And, you know, it was just devastating. So ended up getting back down to Fort Benning after all that, after we came home, you know, from that. Kelly and I got a chance to, you know, have a baby with me being there. I got to
Yeah.
see my daughter Ellie born. She was born at Martin Army on Fort
All
Benning.
right.
Um, and, you know, that's when I really started to think like, this isn't gonna be able to work out.
Yeah.
I can't in good conscience keep doing this with my family and, you know, with the military in the state that I am in, because I was just not a healthy
Yeah.
guy,
Yeah.
Jeff. You know, I had been running, you know, so hard, so long. Um, you know, I just didn't know who I was. And, you know, so we ended up deciding it's time to get out of the military. And fast forward into
Mm-hmm.
2009 is when I actually exited the military and got into commercial sales. So
Yeah.
I was working in laboratory sales for Quest Diagnostics.
Well, by the way, as you're describing that, I was sitting there thinking, you're telling the story of 10 million men right now, and ladies, to be honest, who have been running nonstop since they finished school and went to work, and they've been trying to hold a family together. But every second that I spend at work is make my family life is going downhill, and every second that I spend with my family life, work seems to suffer, and I'm struggling to keep it together.
Mm-hmm.
And I've said in every episode, and I really wish Kelly was part of this because I would tell her to her face, man, what the sacrifices that military families make, it's unfathomable for people that have never been in that world, just what they give up in order for warriors to go serve their country. And I'm talking children as well as spouses. Um,
Yeah.
so I think a lot of really, really committed soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines get to the same point you do, and they decide, man, if I keep this up, I'm not going to have a family. So I got to transition. And you decide to transition at a really important point in your military career where if I stick around, I've got a retirement coming a few years down the road. But if I'm going to walk, I better walk right now, or else I won't have a family when I retire. So you go to work for
Yeah.
Quest. Talk about
Yeah.
the few years of, well, first of all, I got to just hear from you. What was it like to transition out of the military? Because for me, I thought it was going to be easy, and it wasn't. Not nearly as easy as I thought it was going to be.
Same for me, Jeff.
Yeah.
It was, you know, I was a guy who 11 years in, you know, I had made my 7 and 7. I was a sergeant
Uh-huh.
first class. I had all the bells and whistles, CIB, Master Blaster, Mustard Stain,
You're
you
on
know,
the way to the
Pathfinder.
top. Yep.
Yeah, I'm the man at the top, right?
Yeah.
And I just figured I'd jump from peak to peak, you know, like it'd be fine. I'll just, but I did not anticipate the rock slide and the valley that I
Yep.
landed in. And, you know, it was devastating on so many levels, devastating on an identity level because I was so over identified as a Ranger at this
Right. Of
point in
course.
time.
Yep.
You know, I was devastated in a relationship context. I had been with the same guys for a decade, and now I felt like I had cut my player card and I wasn't in anymore.
You just lost your
And
first family, right?
I lost my first family, and then in the midst of all of that, the chaos that was unfolding inside my marriage, inside my family, I lost my second family in the process as well. You know, Kelly and I made all the mistakes, all the stupid mistakes that you make. You know, with this kind of environment where everything was just so unsettled, and we essentially were moving in two different
Yeah.
directions. You know, basically functionally almost divorced without
Right.
signing the paperwork,
Yeah.
because at this point in time, you know, we had been together for almost 10 years, and you know, I wasn't there for the first 3 years because of war, and then, the field. I had been gone for
Uh-huh.
about 70% of our marriage. Even when I took the job at Quest Diagnostics, I took a job traveling. So I was in a hotel 3 nights a week,
Oh
and I was just
man.
alone. It was such a
Yeah.
lonely, devastating environment. And I felt like I wasn't wanted at home. I felt like I wasn't welcome in my Ranger community. I felt like I was trying to figure out what it meant to be a professional and
Right.
not really knowing how that works out. And, drinking more alcohol than I should have,
Of course.
not sleeping,
Uh-huh.
in the midst of all that, Jeff. Yeah, and I will say, like, and I really hope that any of our service members and veteran listeners will really truly hear this part. When I walked out, we all know the way the VA works is that you have to
Uh-huh.
give them your records and say, this is what's wrong with me. I need help. And for me, having been, a ranger all that long, right? That felt a lot like surrender. And as we
Oh
know,
yeah.
surrender is not a ranger
That's
word,
right. Yep.
right? So, for me, I basically went in there, I ripped out half of my med records that had anything to do with the psychological stuff that was
Uh-huh.
going on with me. I gave them all of my musculoskeletal stuff, and they said, well, where are you, what's wrong? And I said, nothing. I don't want anything from you,
Yeah.
because I didn't. Because it is an unreasonable expectation to think that somebody who is expected, these warriors that are out there fighting every day, we expect them to be indomitable, and then we ask them to be vulnerable the
Yeah.
next day when they go to
Yeah.
the VA,
Right.
right? And so I was that guy. And what that equates to, Jeff, is in that season, right? So now let's talk, it's like 2009 through 2010, 2011.
Uh-huh.
I was going undiagnosed PTSD, undiagnosed traumatic brain injuries,
Yep.
undiagnosed sleep apnea, musculoskeletal damage in my back, nerve damage, all over the place. I had 4 hernias. I
Good
had,
gracious.
blown out my knees, my ankles. You talk about the damage that is done, rangering. I had gone through all of that and was receiving no care
Yeah.
and no help with any of that. So
Yeah.
every day, was terrible. And frankly, I was just a mean bastard and angry.
Yeah. I hope veterans are listening to this broadcast right now, because I know countless guys like you, Brandon, who did the same thing. They were so tough, so dependable in the military. And then when it came time to transition, they had to go to the VA and they had to say, what's wrong with me? And they said what you said, nothing, I'm good. The truth is they're not good, not at all, but they're really good at covering up the fact that they're not good. So of course, when you ask me if there's anything wrong with me, I'm going to tell you, no, I'm good. And it's only later when when the bottom drops out that everybody realizes this guy ain't good. And
Yeah.
and hopefully somebody's hearing you right now, and they don't need to have to get to this point in their life before they stand up and say, hey, I'm not good, I need a little bit of help here, which regularly comes up on this show. And I'm glad it regularly comes up on this show, because if you're going to be unbeatable, you're going to get punched in the face by life. You're going to get knocked down, and you're going to have to admit that hurt. And I got bloodied a little bit. I'm going to get back up on my feet, but wow, that hurt. And I need a little bit of help getting back up on my feet. And I need a little bit of help. That's really hard for warriors, especially guys like you and others, special operators, to say, I need a little bit of help getting back on my feet. In fact, man, as you were talking, I was just thinking, leaving the Army is traumatic. Your entire identity is tied up in the Ranger Regiment, and now you're no longer a Ranger, which itself will cause many guys to go off the cliff. And your marriage is falling apart. And let's just be honest, Brandon, you and I both know guys that have put a pistol in their mouth when they got to that point in their life and they can't take it and they blow their head off. And I'm sitting there thinking, Brandon, there's something different about you, man. When other buddies of mine from the Ranger Regiment would have just said, I can't take it anymore, and they kill themselves, you don't. So I think I just need our listeners to hear, why didn't you, man? Because this is the point where a lot of our buddies, mine and yours, would have, they just said, that's it, it's over. I don't want to live like this anymore. How did you make it through it, man?
Well, the truth is that for much of it, I had those thoughts, Jeff. I
Yeah.
thought about suicide. the truth is that the first time I contemplated suicide, I was 11 years old and I didn't want to live anymore. And the weird part about it is, finding myself in the depths, even as a little guy, I would ask God, like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
I'll remind you, like, I'm a Jew, right? The blood in my veins is Jewish blood. And the way that our culture understands it is that if you were born by the womb of a Jewish mother, you're a Jew.
Yeah.
And so I had that hammered into my head my entire life.
Of
And yet
course.
we would never talk about God,
Yeah.
which was the weirdest thing, right? Like, what am I supposed to do with this? And yet all those nights, in Afghanistan on target, I would be reciting Psalm 23,
Uh-huh.
because this is a psalm of my people, right? A
That's
psalm
right.
of David that we can go with, right? And what I would say is that, there were nights, like the night that we were inserting into the Chagall Valley during
Mm-hmm.
winter strike, and our MH-47 almost, skipped its rotors off of the mountainside, and then before I know it, and I'm the chalk leader in the back, looking out the back, of the bird, and we're in a dead spin over the Chagall Valley, and
Ouch.
all I can see is ground sky, ground sky. Other buddies later would recount to me that they were literally hovering in the air. Another
Uh-huh.
buddy said he was crying, in the back, and it's in moments like that, when it's so bad that I just remember having the clarity of thought. I had two thoughts in that bird over the Chagall
Okay.
Valley. Number one, I will never see my son again. That was the first thought.
Uh-huh.
Number two, God, please save us. God, would you please save us? Now, Jeff, I don't know how a double prop helicopter comes out of a spin,
I don't either.
but it did. And I would recount moments like that, even fast forward into 2011 and think about, like, there's got to be something. There has to be a reason why I'm still here. I shouldn't be here, but I am. And I would wonder, what is going on there? What is the story? What is happening in the background right now that I don't see
Right.
in some unseen space or realm that is going on here? Why am I still alive? Why did I not die and Jay died, or Dave died, or
Right.
Casey died, and
Mm-hmm.
all these brothers? Why am I still here? And I would think about things like, in 2006, I had the honor of participating in the Best Ranger competition, and I was able to go with an amazing partner, Jeremiah Pittman, amazing human being,
Yeah.
and like man of faith. And Jeremiah and I, in the train up, we would spend all these late nights on the backwoods of Fort Benning,
Uh-huh.
and he would share Christ with me. And I'd be like, yeah, man, I don't know. Like, I got the God thing I'm good with. This whole Christ thing, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And frankly, growing up in the environment I grew up in, my sick father, when he was around, he hated Christians so much. Jeff, this man would pay me money to beat up other kids, and he was particularly excited when it was a Christian kid.
Wow.
Yeah, he was a sick dude, right? And so, but I would think back to those times, like Jeremiah and I, or my platoon sergeant Jay Hall back
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
275, another strong man of faith, or Jim Mapes,
Uh-huh.
and all these guys that I had known across the way who, they would talk to me, and because we were family, and they were, we were in on the same family. And I would think about, like, I think what kept me from really taking my life in that time was this sense of, there's got to be something better here. There's got to be something greater here.
Yeah.
And holding on to the reality that, like, I don't want my kids to grow up without a father, because I
Yeah.
know the damage
Yeah.
that puts on your heart. And so, I kept going and kept going and kept going. And I should just mention that, it wasn't a fairy tale story here,
Yeah.
Jeff. Like, the mistakes that I was making, and I was so foolish, because come 2011, I was so tired of this. I was buying this lie. I'm not made for this world outside of
Right.
the military. I'm made for, having a gun in my hand and my hair on fire and flying around the world.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go out in a hail of gunfire, and that's
Uh-huh.
fine by me, because Kelly and these two children will then be able to have a father who and a husband who is
Who's
maybe
at
set up
home
for
and take care of
success.
them. Yeah.
Yeah, not me. Like, I'm just made for destruction, right? That's what I'm here for. And so I was going back into, a job. I was in a pipeline under a 3-letter agency that had a
Uh-huh.
very specialized unit. And I was at the very end stages of it, right? This is 2011 now. I've been out of the Army for 2 years. I'm like, forget it. I'm made for going back to this
Yeah.
life. That door at the very last stage is slammed in my face. No explanation, no reason. I'm like, what are you talking about? This is
Yeah.
crazy,
Right.
right? Kelly was kind of moving in her own path, and that door was slammed in her face. And I kid you not, the week later, my company, Quest, says, hey, listen, we tried Alabama. It's not working out. The Colorado territory's open. Would you like to go? I called Kelly on the phone. I said, do you want to go to Colorado? And she said, yes. I said, do you want to go to Colorado with me? And she
Wow.
said, yes. And I said, okay. We made the decision in 30 seconds.
Uh-huh.
We cleared out our house and left Columbus, Georgia in 1 week. We were out in Colorado as fast as we could and got
Uh-huh.
to Colorado. And things started to change in the way that we were like, okay, we're in a different space and place. We're going to give
Yeah.
this a try. And Jeff, we got invited to come to a church service. A colleague at a gym said, hey, do you guys want to come to my church? And Kelly and I actually were in this place where I had been seeking for a long time
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
this point, trying to answer the question, like, why am I still here?
Uh-huh.
And we get invited to this church and we show up and it's like mega church. I'm like, what the heck?
Right.
What do I do with this?
Yeah.
Right. And Kelly immediately looks over at me and she's like, I am so sorry. I don't know
Yeah.
what to
Right.
do here. But we sat down and, we listened and it was like, like, okay, this is cool. And we came back and we came back and we came back. And after 4 weeks of coming back, and again, I had been doing years of searching and asking and seeking and wondering and saying, like, what do I make of all this? We gave our lives to Jesus in March of 2012.
Wow.
I'm sorry. Yeah, March of 2012.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want people to hear this. You grew up in a Jewish home where it was very anti-Jesus. So for you, this isn't an easy, nor is it a highly emotional decision, right? Like there's been a lot of thought and a lot of, not thought necessarily, but there's been a lot of incidents that bring you to this point in your life, right?
Yeah. Big time. I mean, this was a very big mountain, so to speak, for me to
Yeah.
crest. And the truth, Jeff, though, is, to answer the question of like, how did I get, how do you get through it all? I, you know, I knew that I knew that there had to be a reason why God saved me,
Yeah.
and I didn't understand what that was. And then here I find myself, completely broken. The life that I tried to live on my way, the world's way, the marriage I tried to have the world's
Uh-huh.
way, you know, was in shambles,
Yeah.
and that's where Christ met me in my pain. And it was, I mean, everything has changed since then. It hasn't, I'm not saying everything's been easy since
Yeah.
then, mind
Yeah.
you, but it has been one step of faith forward, as we have gone one
Right.
by one.
Yeah. And if you're anything like me, it may feel like one step of faith forward, two steps back, sometimes, an entire, a mile back and one step forward, but still,
Yes,
learning and growing, right?
absolutely.
Yeah. I just want to point this out, man. What I'm hearing you say is at the point where you realize I can't handle this anymore, I need help. Jesus supernaturally stepped in and he started to take over for you. And that's when things really started to change, right?
Absolutely. I think about suffering, in many ways. Like you have suffering occur. Some situation of suffering occurs. And for me, much of my life felt like it had been highlighted by suffering,
Yeah.
different episodes of suffering. And then you learn to survive. It's like the second stage, so to speak. The second stage being this survival. And I think that
Uh-huh.
what happens is that we get stuck in a cycle of suffering and survival many times, and that's not the best life that God has for us.
Right.
God has more for us. Jesus came to bring life,
Right.
to the fullest,
To the
right?
fullest, right?
That's right.
Go read John chapter 10, verse 10. Yep.
Amen. And so that is right there. When I think about, I was surviving, I wasn't living, and so many folks I think end up there, and I'm saying that because I get it. I've lived it.
Right.
I was surviving. But the point of, transformation, that growth, right? So now we're kind of enduring here, right?
Uh-huh.
But instead, if we're going to persevere, that point of transformation, which I would say is where growth is you go from surviving to surrender. And surrender being that, epoch in a life where you say, I cannot do this on my own. I can't make this on my own. Christ, will you enter into this space and walk some hard miles with me? Will you
Right.
save me? And that's where, you then go from suffering to survival to surrender to salvation.
Yeah.
And salvation then becomes, the launch point, which I think then ushers us into an opportunity to live on mission, with Christ for the good of
Right.
others.
Yeah.
That then leads to a life of significance.
Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. I hope people are hearing you right now. Look, nobody wants to be in this stage of life that you and Kelly are in, where we're just surviving. Man, we're working as hard as we can just to keep our head above water. And no matter how hard we try, we're not keeping our head above water. We keep going down. And when you finally get to that point, it's no fun to be there. But when you get to that point, you start to look for help. And like you, that's exactly what happened to me. And I reached out and I needed supernatural help. And that's where Jesus met me, because I had no choice but to surrender. I'm going under. And as hard as I try, it's not
Mm.
working. So help me. And when I got to that point, he stepped in and radically helped me like he helped you. And I hope every listener hears this, man. He'll do the exact same thing for you. But you first got to get to the point of absolute surrender. And that's where he steps in.
Yeah, I want to I'd love to make an observation here. So, as a young late '90s Ranger, I want to make sure, and I hope you don't mind me doing this,
Sure,
Jeff,
go
but
for it.
everybody knew who Jeff Struker was. Everybody. And so the guy who was, the Panama vet, the guy who was the Somalia vet, the guy who was first at Best Ranger competition, like you were one of the heroes. What I want to make sure people are also hearing is this, and even you had to surrender to
Absolutely.
Christ. You're
Yeah.
as tough as they come. You are, the archetypical, Ranger. You're a Ranger legend. You're a guy in the Ranger Hall of Fame, right? And so, even for a guy like you to be able to say that, like, that is the truth that I think is right in front of us all, that many of us don't want to
Yeah.
accept.
Agreed.
There is a reason that you have been built with this part of you that you cannot fill. You can't fill it. Not with accomplishments, not being, at the top of the top, not with all the badges and the ribbons, not with sex, not with drugs, not with alcohol,
Uh-huh.
not with money. Nothing is going to fill that hole, because it is operating on a spiritual realm.
Right.
And that is the way that we have been knit together as the image of God,
Yeah.
mind, body, and spirit.
Soul. Yeah.
And you have to get that soul aligned with the Creator, because all it is doing is it is trying to find its way back home
Right.
to its Creator. And that's where surrender comes into play.
Yeah, man, that is really well said because a lot of people are trying to fill that hole right now with alcohol. They're trying to fill it with the next promotion. They're trying to fill it with more relationships. And I'm talking a girl hoping that guy is going to treat me right and make me feel about myself the way I want to feel, or that guy who thinks if I have sex with another girl and another girl and
Hmm.
another girl, it'll fill me up. And it doesn't. And nothing that physically, tangibly, even emotionally this world has to offer is going to fill that hole up, because that hole was created by God to be filled by Him and Him alone. So everything else is just going to leave you empty. Try it as
That's right.
much as you can. It's just going to leave you empty. And there are many, many examples of this all through
That's
history.
right. You know, contrast is a powerful educator. I
Yeah.
lived 33 years of my life outside of God's,
All right.
best for me.
Uh huh.
I did it all, Jeff. I have done it all.
Yeah. The book of
And I will
Ecclesiastes,
tell
right?
you,
That's you, right?
that's right. And I will tell you this right now. I'll take Christ.
Yeah.
So if any of our listeners out there, are hearing this, like, I get it.
Uh
I've
huh.
been there. I chased the alternatives. Doesn't even come close.
Yeah. I totally agree. No, and I'm saying many people would say the same thing. Like I literally had it all. I think of Deion Sanders, the enormously successful athlete who wrote the book Money, Power, Sex, and he said in that book, "I had money, I had power, I had sex, and I was ready to drive my car off a bridge and kill myself because it left me so empty. And then I found
Yep.
Jesus, and that filled me up." And the money, power, sex, all of it doesn't really touch what Jesus has done for me. Hey,
Yes, sir.
Brandon, I got to get to this point now. Man, it's not all unicorn kisses and fairy dust after this, but God does start to do a work in your marriage, start to do a work in your life, and things start to look different. So take us on a very short journey of now you start to transition, and eventually you end up uh, helping to lead a very important nonprofit before you step aside and you and Blaine start Applied Leadership Partners. Kind of catch us up on how you got to where you are now.
Absolutely. So, come 2013, I had felt like God was pulling my heart in other directions. At this point, I had been with Quest for 5, 6 years. I was a
Mm-hmm.
sales director making boatloads of money. And I had this sense of like something else God's pulling me somewhere. I feel like my mission field's about to change. And so I had kind of resolved, this. I would love to deploy my skills that I've learned in leadership and in um, revenue development. At the time, I was leading a $30 million district, and see if I can help my people. Go back to
Yeah,
the tribe and help
yeah.
veterans. Um, a week later, I'm not kidding you. A week later, after I had resolved that, Blaine Smith, who at the time was the executive director of Team Red, White, and Blue, Team
Mm-hmm.
RWB, reached out. Now, Blaine and I had met as sales reps at Quest. And he said, "Hey, buddy, like, what do you think about coming over and trying to help us do some revenue development and some leadership at the exec level?" And I'm like, "I don't know anything about nonprofit." And he's like, "I think you're going to be great." So Kel and I prayed about it, and we took a 60% pay cut and took a job at an
Ouch.
upstart nonprofit. When I got there, Team Red, White, and Blue I think we had somewhere around 30,000 members, and we were really just starting to pick up steam.
Uh-huh.
When Blaine and I, by the time we left, 3, 4 years later, um, we had 212 communities, 150,000
Wow.
members. And our mission was to enrich the lives of America's
Yeah.
veterans by
Yeah.
connecting them to their community through physical
Yeah.
and social activity. So did that for a while. Was a blessing. Did some really good research on that. Published an Enriched Life Scale with Dr. Caroline Angel and
All
some
right.
other teammates, which ended up getting picked up by the Department of Defense, which really started to dig into this health, people, and purpose equation to get upstream. So before you get to the nasty pistol in the mouth moments, or
Uh-huh.
sleeping with the next person who will sleep with you. And so from there, actually left there after a while, went to work at Colorado's oldest nonprofit, the Tennyson Center for Children, working with
Mm-hmm.
abused and neglected kids. Um, I should mention that in the midst of all of that, I finally went back to the VA and I finally told the
Got
truth,
some help.
got some help, and started to get a lot of treatment for, some of the stuff that I have experienced over the years and what are lingering with me. And so again, I felt God tugging me in a different direction come 2018. And so, or 2018, 2019. And I left the Tennyson Center with no real plan, uh, other than I felt God pulling me to apply to Denver Seminary, where I
Yeah.
started a Master's of Divinity with an emphasis in leadership.
Okay.
And shortly thereafter, Blaine and I reconnected, and one conversation turned into many hours of conversation, which turned into a plane ride to Tampa. And at the end of it, Blaine and I just said, we have to do this. We
Yeah.
have to start this. And we started a company called Applied Leadership Partners. And our entire emphasis is to come alongside leaders that are doing great work out in the world and help them be more effective
Yeah.
and sustainable in their practice. And we do that by deploying sound leadership wisdom. I deploy my Masters of Divinity with an emphasis in leadership into the marketplace every single day,
All right.
and just really help folks to develop as leaders and to improve team cohesion and build tighter knit, higher performing teams, and
Yeah.
strengthen the culture so that they can not only be effective, but they can be effective sustainably for the
Right.
long haul,
Yeah.
or in other words, so that they can be unbeatable in their own
Yeah.
context.
Yeah. Well, so Applied Leadership Partners has been together now for a couple of years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how
Yep.
are things going for you and Blaine?
They're going very well. We have had the opportunity to work with leaders from the top military special operations units
Uh-huh.
to Fortune 100 companies. We worked with the team from Thermo Fisher Scientific that was on the front lines of deploying the COVID test in the midst
Wow.
of COVID. We've
Wow.
worked with local nonprofits. We've worked with insurance companies. We work with anybody who is interested in wanting to be more effective as a leader, and who is really what we call hungry and humble.
Yeah. So basically, people that are serious and not just giving lip service to this, that's who you guys are working with right now.
That's right, Jeff. And we look, the leadership development space is a $127 billion a year industry. It's a very crowded space, and
Yeah.
Blaine and I just look at it and say, it's great that you have all this stuff. Are you applying it?
Yeah.
Are you actually deploying these principles in space? And we don't give people scripts or anything like that. We do coaching, we do keynotes, and we do leadership development with executives and executive teams, all the way down to frontline leadership teams. And we create a common leadership language. We create alignment around that, and then we give people frameworks that are
Yeah.
actually useful, so that you can actually deploy sound leadership wisdom in your environment. Because the thing about it is that, look, people aren't math problems. People are people,
Right.
right? So
That's
there's no
right.
equation that you can apply to every single person. There's no script for
Right.
leadership. We want to empower people with the principle. We tell a lot of stories from 25 years of leading both in the military and special operations, and also in the commercial sector,
Mm-hmm.
in big business, in startups, in social impact. We've gotten a lot of looks. We haven't seen it all, but we're able to bring,
Yeah.
a combined 50 years of leadership experience, translating what we learned in the special operations world into the business world with results. Blaine and I have generated over $200 million of revenue for the organizations that we've worked with
Wow.
over the last 12 years. And so we bring that into context in a way that helps folks to deploy it within their business so
Yeah.
that they be more effective in their mission for their customers.
Yeah, and a lot of people who are hearing this right now are interested. And when this episode ends, we'll put links in the notes to your LinkedIn and your Facebook page. But you guys are also, you got this very active blog that's generating a lot of interest. Tell people how they can find your blog, and tell them what about your website so that they can just go find you, search you.
Appreciate that, Jeff. You can go to appliedleadershippartners.com. And when you get there, you can take a look around, and you can find our blog very easily in that. We've got a number of pieces that we hang very routinely that cover, some of these factors. You can find perseverance is greater than endurance there, and
All
hear a little
right.
bit of story about Winter Strike 2003 and
Yep.
the episode of my life that I really learned that in, which, we are in the process of writing a book. And that's going to be one of the key components of that book, is just telling the story, and not in a way for, look, I'm not asking people or trying to teach people how to be, Rangers in Afghanistan in
Right.
2003. These are just stories that are windows that open up, new insights or new windows into eternal truths for
Yeah.
people, because man, this stuff has been around for millennia,
Right.
and it is our incredible opportunity to steward people in the way that they can maybe see it through a new sight. So you can go to appliedleadershippartners.com, check out our blog there. You can also find us on LinkedIn. Just look up Applied Leadership Partners on LinkedIn. You can find us on Facebook as well. We host a number of videos and things like that there. And, we love meeting new people and new leaders who are out there doing great things in the world and in their community. Say hi to us, connect with
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
We'd love to have you on the team.
Yeah, and if you're driving right now and you didn't get a chance to write those links down, we're just going to put them in the notes to this episode. So all you got to do is just check out the notes, and you'll have the links right there to LinkedIn, his website, Facebook. I hope that everybody who's listening, just stays connected, so that when their book comes out, you're ready for it. I want to wrap up, Brandon, by a statement and a question. The question first, because this season on Unbeatable, I'm trying to just help the audience get to know you as a person, not just your story. So here's the standard question I'm asking all of the guests this season. Hypothetical, let's say you got one day, no responsibilities at work, no responsibilities at home. There's no big project lingering on the horizon. You can do anything you want, anywhere you want with one day. Where do you go? What do you do? And why?
I'm going to a beach
All
with
right.
my wife,
Oh,
and my kids. Um, and I'm just enjoying the time with them and just being together with them. It doesn't matter what we do. I just want to be on a beach, sitting back and being with my family.
hey, Brandon, I just got to say this, because I don't let a veteran go on this podcast without taking a moment to say thank you for serving the country. Thanks for what you've done for our freedom. Thanks for what you've done in the Ranger Regiment, and for the way that you're leading leaders right now.
Much appreciated, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and would you also, just on behalf of the whole Unbeatable Army, would you tell Kelly thanks for the huge sacrifices that she's made as well?
Absolutely. Much appreciated.
Hey guys, I was so inspired by Brandon, and I hope you were too. In fact, I wrote this quote down while he was talking, and it's going to stick with me this week. I hope it sticks with you too. Perseverance is always greater than endurance. And just being able to handle and survive the tough stuff that you're going through doesn't make you a better person. It just makes you a more tired version of yourself. No, it's when you actually learn from it, grow from it. That's when you become a better and a different person. Brandon fired me up today, and I'm going to carry that quote around with me all week long. I hope this episode fired you up too. And I just want to say thanks for joining us. Hey, if you found us for the first time, why don't you go ahead and subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform? And if you're not already doing it, why don't you follow us on social media? Whatever your favorite social media platform is, LinkedIn, Facebook, you name it, just search at Unbeatable Podcast and follow us. But I also want to know, I've got a free resource. I created this actually when I was in the Rangers working with Brandon, and then retooled this thing specifically for you. It's called the Unbeatable Army Survival Guide. And this guide is just packed full of quotes and motivational thoughts to help you get up and get off the ground when life has punched you and knocked you down. It's totally free. It's a PDF download. And all you got to do to get it is just go to unbeatablearmy.com. Thanks for joining me. I hope Brandon inspired you. And I'll see you right back here next week on Unbeatable.